Hello. How is everyone doing? What's going on? I hope everyone's doing good. We are on Series 6, which is also Series 5 because we had a cancellation last week. Not enough content, but this week is an exciting week because we are going to be doing a little roundtable discussion with some very high level players that we're kind of excited to talk with. So we've got two players with us. We've got Kevin Clemente from Seattle, Washington. And
I'm not
forgot.
supposed to say
Right. And we've got Brent Tonisson, I think I pronounced that correctly, from Sydney, Australia.
Oh, hello, and yeah, you pronounced that right.
Perfect. Yeah, I almost said Sydney, Washington. I was like, wait a second, hold on. There's no Sydney, Washington. So we'll be doing a sort of roundtable discussion. This topic is focused on getting better at the game. So we're going to be talking a little bit about some background of these two players. We're also going to be talking about what they do during regionals and nationals and that kind of thing. Just some thought process they'll go through, and as well as just preparations they'll do for these bigger events. Because we spend a lot of time talking about league cups and league challenges. Those are some small stuff. Now we're going to talk about some bigger stuff like regionals and the really fun part of competitive Pokemon TCG, right?
you're not wrong.
Is it?
Right?
I feel like you should just be enjoying the game. So
Right.
that's the most fun part. If you don't enjoy the game, nothing else is going to be that fun. So it's all
Exactly.
about if you enjoy the game.
Exactly. Right, Kevin. I think that's the same thing. Is a lot of professors and a lot of people like to talk about. It's about enjoyment.
I mean, yeah. Otherwise, just like Brent said, you wouldn't like be doing it.
Exactly.
But there's something special about traveling, hours to hang out with friends that you wouldn't see
Right.
otherwise
Oh
and
yeah.
play against people from around potentially the world.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. All right. Let's get to the discussion. So, you may notice that there is a hop next to me that way. That is Strong's place. Strong could unfortunately not make it to the round table, so we've got Hop instead. He's professional enough, right? Uh, so let's talk about some introductions because let's get to know you guys a little bit before we get into this. So Kevin, how long have you been playing, and like what's your biggest accomplishment in Pokemon TCG so far? And of course, the easy question: what's your favorite Pokemon?
Cool. So I actually haven't been playing that long. I've been playing for a little over 2 years so far. Biggest accomplishment, I'd say, at Portland Regionals last year, I got top 16, which would be my best finish so far.
I remember that too.
Regionals, but it's not bad.
Right,
And favorite Pokemon's Gyarados.
Gyarados, not Magikarp.
Not Magic.
As much as your username misleads everyone.
It just like rolls off the tongue better.
Right, right. What about you, Brent? Same questions.
Um, yeah, my name's Brent. I've been competing since 2012, and my best accomplishment is probably like I won Malaysia 2 times last year.
Malaysia.
Malaysia regionals, that is.
Oh, nice, nice. That was before they split Malaysia into, I think it was China and
Yeah,
Japan.
it's now under TPC instead of
Yeah.
TPCI.
Right. Yeah.
So that was only announced recently.
Yeah. During the pandemic, weirdly enough,
Yep.
of all times, to announce that change. Favorite Pokemon?
Mew.
Mew. Okay, nice. Mew is one of those Pokemon that I never got to catch in the games until I was like, I went to a actual event at a local like mall area, and they were handing them out for free, and that's it. And then I lost it, and I never had it again. It was an unfortunate accident.
I mean, there's always ways to get it, like red
Right.
and blue.
I think I was at
Pretty sure you can
PAX
still get
West.
it on the 3DS at the moment.
Yeah, I was at PAX West and I was doing a gym challenge, and this girl came up and she's like, "Hey, you play Pokemon, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." She's like, "I've got Mews. Do you want a Mew?" And I was like, "Sure, I'll take a Mew." so, so how did you guys get into TCG specifically? Doesn't need to be a long story, but we'll start with Brent. Um,
I mean, I have a long story. It's like My first experience with the cards was like when I was like a kid, like like 6, 7 years old.
Right.
That was like when I first got them, and then when I was like 10 or 11, I played like Yu-Gi-Oh for a little bit at school, but then I didn't really play.
Hmm.
But it's like I saw some kids playing Pokemon TCG, and then I got into that. One of my friends got into it as well. He was like, "Let's go to some league." He's like, "They have tournaments here," so I went to a league, and then after that, kind of just kept playing a lot. Eventually, got a good deck, and then started playing like bigger events, like the Battle Road, which is like league challenges, and then like cities, which is the equivalent for league cups, and then regionals and everything. I just started playing, and I just never stopped.
Right. I remember back then they had the cities. Some of our older professors in our area talk about cities. Sometimes it's a fun concept. What about you, Kevin?
Yeah, so I originally got into TCG back in the base set era. So like, as a kid, there was like, I like Pokemon because it's the thing that everyone likes. And so we got a bunch of cards. And I wasn't one of the kids. Everyone who I talked to my age is just like, oh, I never knew what the cards did. And I was never okay with that because I'm like, you can clearly read that there's stuff on here. Like there's
Right.
something that's supposed to happen. So I learned what the cards did, and I happened to open a Blastoise and then trade one for my cousin. And so I was able to build a Blastoise Rain Dance deck, which was competitive enough. And I was like, yeah, the card game's a lot of fun.
Right.
And then I keep rolling in with it. And then eventually I got out of it. I played a little bit of Yu-Gi-Oh! I played a little bit of another card game that is since now long gone. And then there was a long hiatus there where I didn't touch the cards at all. And then I eventually was like, man, I like Pokemon. The card game was fun. I've recently moved to Seattle, and I'm like, I don't know anyone here. How am I supposed to meet people? And so there was a sale at GameStop on cards, and I was like, yeah, let's go buy some. And I opened a bunch of packs, and I was like, okay, now what? And then I eventually found like YouTube videos and stuff like that, people like Tablemon, and it was like, okay, I can pick up this game. Like this isn't hard at all. We can do this. And
Right.
that was around what Ultra Prism was the first event I went to, a pre-release for that.
Oh, really?
And
It's
yeah,
not that long ago. For someone
Yeah,
like
it's
me,
not that long ago,
that's
actually.
recent.
Because
Recent.
I started getting back into it around Burning Shadows, and I think my first pre-release event was also Ultra Prism, which is surprising to me because you and I, that means that we've been playing about the same time or the same length, and you're already like up here, and I'm like, eh.
it's just like it's a time commitment. I just like really like grinding out games, thinking about the
Oh yeah,
game, talking with people about it, stuff like
right.
that.
Yeah, that's always the
It all helps, trust
best
me.
part. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Um,
Talking does a lot more than you think.
Oh, for sure, for sure. I know
Just
that a
bouncing
lot of the
ideas
pro
off people.
players hit up the like 1,000 games for their deck. Like they'll hit quadruple numbers of games played with their decks. Sometimes, maybe
A lot
depends.
of the time, if it's a new deck that's like completely new, they will grind a lot. Most of the time, if it's just like a few tweaks on deck, they won't. But they'll bounce a lot of ideas
Right?
always.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So
So like, I know for me, most of the time we're just talking and stuff, and then sometimes we're grinding games, and we use like mass data between like 5 people. It's like 5 people grind games into the deck, and we use the data from all 5 of us.
right, nice. All right. So, did you guys start with competitive, or did you guys do a lot of like just playing casually, and then you decided, hey, I think I can get competitive with these things? Um, start with Kevin.
I am a competitive person, just like by nature. I played sports growing up. There was no like casual game of Monopoly or Uno among family members. It was just like I'm gonna win. Like, this is how it is. So there was like never a doubt. Even when I was going to league at first, I was like, okay, cool, I can stomp everyone here. There has to be more than this, right?
Right.
And so yeah, it's always been like, of course I'm gonna play competitive.
Right. Nice. What about you, Brent?
Uh, I don't know. I feel like I really want to get good at the game because like it was like a couple months since when I first went to league to when like I started playing premier events with points in it. It's like I got my invite in my first year in seniors, and there
Wow.
was like no day 2 system. So
Right.
it's like invite was like kind of the level. Like I finished like third in like the country or something. my first year. It was
Nice.
like, I don't know, I just always tried. Like, I played quite a lot back then, though. A lot.
You had a lot more free
Like,
time back then.
uh, yeah, no. I mean, there are times that I get free time, but then at the moment, nope.
Right, right. Nice. So the biggest question I think a lot of people ask is about how they go about getting into competitive, because like you said, Kevin, some people will get very competitive about things. They don't play things casually, and some people just have a lot of free time. So they'll do a lot of building and testing, like you said, Brent. So for you guys specifically, what do you find is the easiest way to get into it for each of you? Because you guys each have a different perspective on getting into competitive. So do you tend to spend more time building and testing, and that got you into that competitive scene, or did you more of it just doing a lot of casual games and then realized, hey, I'm really good at this?
Uh, I'll start, I guess.
Sure.
Uh, so I guess my story of like getting into and all that comes from the lens of I am a very shy person and a total introvert. I don't like going up to people, talking to people. I had tried doing it all alone
Cool.
originally, and I was like, I'm sure I can do this, right? Like it's not that hard. Like I can go watch some videos, maybe make a few changes to decks and stuff like that. And so my first year was a lot weaker because of that.
Hmm.
And the biggest thing that I can say about like taking that step into like being a very good competitor is meet people, talk to people, and then work with them. Once I
Right.
got a testing partner, everything became so much better. So like there's like a lot of time that we spend. He actually lives in Portland. So like we don't see each other like ever. But there's a lot of time where we're just like bouncing ideas off of each other. He is way more creative than I am. I am the type of person who it's like, okay, what if we just play four of everything? And then the deck's going to be good, right? And then
Right.
he's like, well, what if we play Mimikyu and two fairy energies in our Malamar deck? And, it's like that's stupid. It's a psychic deck, right? But then we kind of bounce ideas off each other and then we meet and we always have like one really big testing session because we don't live near each other. And it's like, all right, 8 hours. We're going to grind out all of our bad ideas, see if they're actually bad. They typically are. We're not actually winning regionals with these bad
Right.
ideas, but it's just like a good chance to find the flaws. So collaboration is the biggest thing about getting into competitive is going, talking to people, exchange some sort of information, whether it's a phone number, Discords, Twitters, Facebook, whatever it is you
Yeah.
use, and then talk to them.
Right.
As I think the biggest thing where I took that next step.
And I think it's super easy now because we have lots of communities around Pokemon TCG that people can get involved in, and not just like just individual communities, but even just like streamers and YouTubers. They tend to spend a lot of time talking about ideas, even as little as talking about an individual card coming out of a set, all the way up to here's this huge deck, and here are the different amalgamations of that deck as they break down. And I think that's a great way to like talk with people, is just like bouncing off ideas. I tend to notice in our leagues that people will do that. They'll like talk to in groups like I won't name any names, but you've noticed the players that like they hang out together, they trade cards together, and they build decks out of each other's cards, that kind of thing. So, what about you, Brent?
Um, can you repeat the question?
Yeah.
What?
So with competitive, what do you think is the best way for a player to get into doing competitive? Is it more of that like I'm really decent at this card game, I should just start learning to get better, or is it more of a let me spend a lot of time building, testing, and collaborating, or anything in between? It doesn't have to be those two specific options.
And I guess I can say that if you're trying to get good at the game, you have two reasons. You're either really good at the game, or you really enjoy the game. If it's not at least one of those, it probably has to be like to really enjoy the game. Because even if you're good and you force yourself, you're probably not going to enjoy it that much. But you have to have a passion. You have to have an ability to play a lot because you're going to need to play a lot.
Right.
It's like these days, PTCG is definitely your best way to play. Like just get a deck on there, grind games whenever you can. If you're a new player, that is it's the easiest way. It will improve. If you play lots of games over time, you will improve.
Right.
And then, of course, going to leagues is really helpful. There are always going to be helpful people at leagues. Not everyone helps you. A lot of people just mind their own. There are going to at least be a handful of people that are willing to help new players. They'll give you advice, very useful advice. You can get testing groups. You can get feedback on your decks. Because yeah, when you start out, generally you don't really have people that are good giving you feedback on your decks. Then, when you're trying to get to the bigger events as well, sometimes you're going to be having to create new ideas. Having friends always helps because not only can they create the ideas, they can also find the flaws in your ideas. And yeah, basically, you want to have you want to have friends, you want to play a lot, and if you have someone else that just helps you there, it'll just be a lot easier and more enjoyable.
Right. Yeah, I definitely agree with the league part because going to a league and spending some time with other people, the communication and stuff like that, it's hard now with the pandemic, but like even outside of the pandemic, when we're back together going to league, and then PTCGO is a really great tool. I think right now specifically for players because it's a really quick, easy way to just grab and put cards together, and even better is that you can have multiple decks using the same cards and all formed differently. Whereas in like real world, if you have 4 of your Mews in one deck, you're gonna have to unsleeve them and sleeve them into another deck just so you can play with that same 4 Mew kind of thing. Which is the one hard thing about me playing professionally or like competitively is because I like to build a lot of decks and I have that problem where I have my good cards in one deck, and if I want to play with a different deck or a different way, I have to like reshuffle the cards and take them out and stuff like that. So
Yeah, or you get proxies, but then that's also a pain because then when you want to play the other deck at the tournament, then you got to unsleeve everything.
right.
You know, so
or you
much.
accidentally come with the deck and it still has the proxies, and you're like, oh no, I need to get these out. So, speaking about regionals, by the way,
I'll bring it up real quick. But
oh
I
yeah,
kind of
sure.
remembered when Brent was mentioning some of the things. Another thing that really helped getting into competitive was I got coaching when I first started,
Oh,
which was one of those things. I mean, you have to like ask yourself the difference between having time and money,
right.
and a full-time job, and I was a full-time grad student at the time, so I had more money than time, and so I was just like, well, one of the things I can do is get coaching from someone who is just better than me, and that also helped to expedite a lot. So if you have the means, it was 110% worth it because 4 coaching sessions definitely made me better than probably months of testing would have done with players of my skill level.
Right. Did you ever do coaching, Brent? Have you ever looked into coaching services or even being a coach?
No, like I have actually gotten like some offers for it, but I haven't really coached because the thing is, I feel like there are like you need a teaching set to coach properly. So I don't think I'm not really prepared for that. It's like I would coach if I was like confident, like yeah, I think I can teach. But I don't have confidence in my teaching ability. Like I have confidence in my playing ability in the game. That's not the problem.
Right.
But it's getting your ideas and like expressing your ideas to other people. It's quite hard. It's a
Yeah.
skill in itself.
Oh yeah, yeah. And Kevin, you're a teacher, so you know where that teaching like that skill kind of lies as well. So
Yeah, see, maybe you could do coaching then one day.
one day he'll pass on his knowledge.
That's why I've gotten into Twitch streaming my games because it's like I'm not anywhere near the best player who's streaming, but I can just like say the things that I'm doing with an explanation behind them. And I've had a lot of people give positive feedback to that. So.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if there's anyone watching that's worse than you, they're gonna improve most
That is
likely.
all.
So
Right.
the way to get across is rude.
Definitely. So talking about regionals, the let's start with your first regional personally. What was it like for you to go to your first regional, and how did it feel playing competitively in that level for the first time? We'll start with Brent.
So my first regional was 2013. Except for us, our regional is different. So like back then, I'm not sure if people know about the European, but European and Australian regionals were like held in game stores, and there weren't that many people.
Oh wow.
Especially since I was a senior. My first regional, I think, had 18 players, which is quite big for a regional back
Right.
then in Australia. It's seniors, keep in mind. I actually won the regional, which is quite crazy. But
Wow.
yeah, like
Yeah.
I need to get like top 4 for my invite, which was like 4-1 since we didn't have ties.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And with it being so small, it was probably easier to build up to first place as
the thing
well.
is, it was in a different state that I never
Mm,
traveled interstate before that. That was my
okay.
first interstate because
Nice.
like there was like a family wedding on our double regional weekend, so I missed 2 regionals. So I had to go out of state to play regionals, and I won. So that was a pretty good weekend.
Nice. Nice. So I'm guessing, Kevin, your most recent regional, or your first regional, was probably a fairly recent one, right?
Yeah, Portland 2018
Okay.
was my first regional, and I don't know, it was just like such a weird experience because like I'm an adult, I've been out of state, all that kind of stuff, but I was like talking to my now wife, then girlfriend at the time, and I was like, so can I like go spend the weekend and play some Pokemon? And she's like, yeah, whatever, that's fine. And so I was like, okay, cool. So I got off work. I drove 3 hours, got in at like 11 p.m. I was like, cool, I'm gonna be up at 6:30 in the morning. I'm gonna play in this. I had done some testing. That was part of where going back to getting coaching. I had been working with Isaiah Williams quite a bit, and we had built a Zorogarb list, Zorak and Garbodor,
There you
which was it was complete trash. Like looking back
go.
and knowing what the meta turned into, it was like, oh my gosh,
Right.
why did we think this was a good deck? But like at the time, the deck was like amazing because
Right.
no one was prepared for it.
Oh, for sure.
And so I get there, I'm just incredibly tired. I got a bad hotel. That is anyone who's like going to a regional, don't just look at 2 pictures and be like, yeah, this hotel's fine. That is not good advice. I have stayed in some very bad hotels. So definitely plan that out. But anyway,
If you want to
so
hear horror stories about first regional, so my first regional was actually Portland Regionals 2019. So the most recent regional that was hosted. I went with a bunch of friends, and like originally I was supposed to stay with a friend who lived in Portland, and he dropped out, and he was like, "Yeah, I can't host you. It's fine." And I was like, "No, it's not really fine because I was planning on staying with you, kind of thing." So a bunch of friends were like, "Yeah, sure, you can stay with us." They maxed out a hotel room, and so when we went to go check in, we are like, "Oh yeah, by the way, this guy's also staying with us." And the hotel guy's like, "Yeah, that's not happening because the max capacity is already hit." And so we sat there debating on like, do I buy a new hotel room? Should we split it different ways, or how do we do this? And what ended up happening is that we just kind of snuck me in, and I just slept on the floor, and it was the worst experience because it was the night before the first day. I was supposed to be judging, and so I like slept on a cold floor and woke up really badly and just like went in at 6 a.m. and started getting prepared as a judge, and I was just like, yeah, this is gonna be my day.
This is
So
fine.
yeah, this is fine. I'll do it. So so I'm sitting there and I'm handing out the mats and I'm just like about ready to fall asleep, chugging some like something sugary because I don't drink coffee, of course, and just like this is the day. It's gonna happen somehow. So yeah, I did not prepare for that apparently. um all right, so oh, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say, yeah, if you don't live where the regional is, just prepare for something to be like weird or go wrong.
Right.
Like
Don't
I
ever
think
expect
everyone,
travel to work.
yes,
So, all right. So, regionals semi there. Usually, so your regional, Brent, was like, what do you say, 32 players? It was a pretty small first regional.
I mean, for
Um,
senior, it was senior, so it was like
oh, okay.
18. But
Oh,
yeah,
okay. Yeah. And then for us, like, Kevin, our first regional was like 200, 300 players kind of thing. Because Portland was pretty big.
it
No?
was five, six
Oh,
hundred.
500. Oh, wow. I do not remember 500 players in that room.
I can see that in this
Yeah,
test. You definitely can get those numbers there.
right. Nowadays, yeah, for sure. But internationals. So those are you would say probably a big difference in ball game because internationals usually draws in actual players from across the country rather than just nearby players in the same region. Brent, what was your first international, and how did it compare to a regional for you? Especially like, did you feel like you had to prepare differently to go to an international versus a regional, that kind of thing?
So my first international was the first one actually, so the London 2016.
Oh wow.
And
Okay.
yeah, I only had stipend because I bubbled out of nationals, so I didn't get the travel award.
Oh no.
So like I had to pay to go here. That was my
Oh
first
no.
time ever buying an international flight because I went to Worlds like 4 times or something. Most of them were in senior, so I got like a travel award in some form.
Nice.
So so yeah, like I had to pay to go there. So I know, like I was pretty defeated by that because I'm thinking, oh, I'm not doing that well.
Right.
And like I was thinking there should be a travel award for the next one. So my goal was hitting top four in the region because I it was quite easy to predict how they would give the travel award. So yeah, I wasn't sure. Like I just like I was gonna play in Eviltal Zoroark. I'm not sure if anyone knows anything about Eviltal EX.
If you want
Then
to, if
I
you want to
played
give a short
Eviltal.
description.
Like Eviltal EX is basically wait, what would be the best description? It's like 20 plus 20 damage for each energy attached to both actors. So similar to Victine EV.
Right. Or Tapu Lele
Okay, so
GX with energy drive.
yeah, okay, so and then the Zoroark was like it does more damage based on how many bench Pokemon there are.
Okay. Uh,
So
we have
it's
that
like
with the
10 plus
total
30
commander
times.
for Empoleon. I think Empoleon
Oh,
total
oh no,
commander.
it's for each of the opponent's bench.
Oh,
So
okay.
it's like I think we have something like that in format at the moment probably, but it's not that good.
It sounds
Marlon.
Yeah,
familiar. What's that, Kevin?
basically, yeah,
I was saying
Kevin.
Marlon GX. That's
Oh
the
yeah,
same.
no, it's exactly more RGX. Yeah, it's the exact same
There
effect.
you go.
Just without the cool ability. Well, I guess Mawile has its own cool ability, but
And it had the stand-in, which is Russian ability. That is a cool ability. It's just not the same.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
so
yeah. Stronk is mentioning
I
Mawile
decided to
GX is the
play.
same attack. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I decided to swap to Garbodor since a lot of the deck's flaws were covered by Garbodor,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just strictly better. I started the event 7-0, and like I didn't finish too well. I only got top 32, but I did start 7-0, which is pretty nice. It's like day
Nice.
two, I just kept tying. It was so sad.
Right. What about you, Kevin? How did first IC go or internationals?
actually never been to an IC.
Oh.
So it was just invite and chill
Uh huh.
because race for the stipend in the US isn't financially worth it, like at
Right.
all.
Oh
So I'm just
yeah.
like, it's not worth anything going for it. And by the time NAIC rolls around, no offense to Ohio, anyone who lives in Ohio, but I'm not paying $600 plus hotel to go to Ohio because I've
Right.
already got my internet. So I've actually never been. I want to for the
Oh.
experience, but it's also kind of like, can we put it somewhere where I'd like to spend multiple days?
Right. Right. Yeah. 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 I can say the same thing. I've never been to an IC before, or a Worlds actually. My first World was supposed to be this year, the 2020 Worlds in London, but we all know what happened to that one. so, uh, so the I think another big focus that a lot of people like to think about is what do you think about when you play? Like when you're sitting there and you're thinking, there's a lot of things that like, especially commentators, they'll go through and they'll talk about like what players are thinking about. Like you can watch a player do a deck search and they'll start poking cards up to like count. Okay, what do I have? But what are some other things that maybe you've never heard that people do, or what are things that you specifically might think about when you're running a deck? We'll start with Brent on that one.
That's kind of a hard question because what kind of things? Like I think a lot of the things that I would do is I have like a lot of the damage mappings like in decks like spread decks. I generally or like decks that don't have one hit KOs. I generally know all my numbers before an event. So like if I see something, it's like yeah, I know I can use a tackle for 40 with a choice band, which choice
Right,
band's plus 30 to GX or EX if
right.
people don't know that.
So you tend to
And it's like
focus
I know
on.
that
Oh,
like I know like a lot of my calcs in advance. It's like I know this play that I can do 40 into 150 KO something.
right,
I already know that in advance. I think of all these even multiple turns ahead, and that's why I was very good at something like Decidueye, which is when you place 2 damage, and generally in spread decks because I can see like multiple times ahead. It's like I'm gonna get these KOs at this time. This is gonna work out.
So you tend to focus on like knowing, okay, this is how much calculation I can do, and these are the specific numbers I'll hit with these specific combinations.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing to think about with spread decks because that's what spread decks are. Is it's a lot of damage calculation between, okay, how many Pokemon can I hit with X amount of damage across the board, versus what Strunk and I mentioned last week or 2 weeks ago, was the more aggro decks, the ones that do kind of a single hit on one Pokemon and just knock it out completely. Do you tend to think about some things a little bit differently, like how can I boost the damage, or what cards are in my deck that I can focus on grabbing to max out the damage output?
I would say for the aggro decks, it has to be about the deck building. Most of them, it's so important to just you need to balance your consistency in text. It matters so much. If the deck just most of them, if they do not draw well, they just do not function. Like they just straight up lose the game.
Right,
It's not as much like with the spread deck because generally spread decks are used to playing from behind or something.
right,
But if an aggro deck, it's like you just miss your early game. You're just doing nothing.
yeah.
So I think the deck building definitely is your most important part.
The
Yeah, people
consistency.
don't really mention that, I think, enough. It's like the deck building is just so important with those.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. What about you, Kevin? What are some things that go through your mind?
I don't know. That's like a really like. There's a lot. There's
Yeah.
so much. So like as soon as my opponent flips over their Pokemon, it's like, I mean, exactly like Brent said, you have all the calcs already in your brain.
Hmm.
You know the matchup. You should know the matchup. There's the
Right.
occasional time where your opponent flips over a Pidgey before you know Pidgey control exists, and you're just like, oh no.
You're like you're like this is either a joke or I'm in for a tough time.
Does
But
oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, but yeah, you like so you're very immediately you're like, okay, my game plan's gonna be X, Y, Z. Thankfully, Pokemon's generally linear enough where you know like, especially in this current standard format we're hanging out at, it's like, okay, I know the game's generally going to go in this direction. I need these resources. This is my opponent's game plan. This is how I either want to stop their game plan, or it depends on the type of deck. Do you want to slow them down? Do you want to outspeed them? Do you want to actually just blatantly stop them? So
Right.
it's stuff like that. You want to know, okay, this is my game plan.
Gotcha. So
And then
like,
when,
oh,
oh, you go.
I was gonna say so. In that kind of thought process, it's a lot about like you see that first Pokemon and you're immediately already planning for, okay, they're gonna bring out these specific Pokemon with that. They're gonna play this specific style, so you want to meet that style with your deck specifically. So you're kind of already planning out your route A, B, and C for how the match is gonna go, which is a interesting thought process and a lot of thinking because you're kind of already playing 10 moves, 10 turns ahead of everything and trying to plan, okay, am I going to have less prizes at this point? What cards am I going to need the most in the next few turns? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. And part of that is the decks that I tend to gravitate towards. So if anyone watching has played other games, all TCGs seem to go off the control, mid range, and aggro, and one
Mm-hmm.
of those three archetypes.
Right.
I tend to gravitate towards the mid range, which is the type of deck that gives you a bunch of options. It can, I don't know, in the Pokemon at least, it lets you go faster than your opponent sometimes. And you can be like, okay, I can turn this into an aggro deck, or I can turn this into a control deck,
Okay.
or I can kind of stay and pick my options. And so the decks that I gravitate towards, exactly. You have options. You just need to know which options do I need to pick in what order, blah blah blah.
Right, right. And so for some of the players who may not know specific wording for everything, our aggro decks tend to be decks that are very attack heavy. They tend to max out on damage, doing 300, 250, that kind of damage in a single turn. Your mid range tends to be your flexible types that can fit between both an aggro deck and maybe what we call a control deck, which is less about attacking and more about getting your opponent to just drop everything and basically do what you want them to do. Our last deck type that we talked about was our spread decks. Spread decks tend to do damage across the board rather than focus on the active. So Pokemon like Decidueye in I think it's Darkness Ablaze, if I'm remembering correctly. It has that ability to snipe your opponent's bench for abilities or just as an attack. It'll just kind of target the bench and not really focus on your opponent's active. So you tend to see those types of deck types and archetypes. We talked about ADPZ a few weeks ago in our last podcast. You guys would mostly call that an aggro deck, but it has sort of that control-y feel, which is probably why you think that it may have more of a play, and it's kind of a flexible. If you guys would agree, I don't.
So this is going to be like a weird statement, I think, and a lot of people are going to say ADPZ is control because it's like you win in 4 turns. Sorry, not control, aggro.
Aggro.
But you can make the argument that it is control because you prevent your opponent, or you attempt to prevent your opponent from playing Dedenne, Crobat, stuff like that. So, I mean, I come from the camp where I think every deck is a control deck. You're controlling something about your opponent's board. So, like, yeah, I would agree. Like, you're controlling, like, okay, if you play 2 Dedennes, I just win. Cool.
Right. Exactly. What about you, Brent?
I mean, any deck that puts enough pressure always limits your opponent's options. So, however, if your deck is aggro, depending on how aggro it is, it's always going to be like controlling some aspect of your opponent's game.
For sure.
But yeah, I guess it's hard to tell because the speed of ADP kind of warrants it as like an aggro deck.
Yeah.
But of course, if it's an aggro deck, you limit your options that your opponent has.
Right.
So
yeah.
So like that's just how it works.
It's kind of the opposite feel of what we call a mill deck, where you're kind of forcing your opponent to just mill through their cards rather than doing any specific damage. The mill decks tend to take longer amounts of times going through, and there's a very different thought process in mill decks. It's more of, okay, how do I keep myself alive and just let my opponent just take knockouts and exhaust themselves, right?
Yes. And cool. The current standard format does not have as many of those, but the Pokemon TCG really, really likes to print cards for them. So if you want to get into the Pokemon TCG during your lifespan, there will be some very, very powerful controlling, stall, mill, etc. archetypes that will exist.
Right. What do you guys feel about different archetypes between expanded and standard? Most of the series is focused a lot on standard, but there are a few regionals that do end up doing expanded. And I know, Brent, you've done more expanded, I think.
No expanded.
Do you tend to see that kind of archetype difference between the formats?
I mean, I'll probably not mention much about archetype, but deck building. In expanded, a lot of your cards are 1-of and 2-of, because in expanded there's just so much draw power and search power. It's like you basically need to run the cards that you will need. Like if you need this tech card, you're gonna run it. It's like if you don't need it, you just play like Battle Compressor or something.
Right.
In standard, most of the time, a lot of the cards is just, I need 4 of these cards. There aren't enough good cards in the format. There are many cards and I'm just slamming 4 of them in my deck because I need them. And it's just like a consistency thing.
Yeah.
But in expanded, it's like you can run a 1-of that card with 4 Versus Seeker and it's fine. You'll hit. You just need to draw it once, and then you have it like 4 times.
Right. Exactly.
And you will draw it because there's just so much draw power.
And for those who don't know, maybe VS Seeker is kind of a redo of a supporter in your discard pile. So once you've discarded a supporter, you can essentially use VS Seeker to pull it back out and sort of replay it again. What about Kevin? Because I think you've dabbled in some expanded in your time so far.
I actually think I've had more success technically in expanded than standard, but that's not for any reason other than they keep giving us expanded events on the West Coast. So sure. I'm kind of forced to do it. But yeah, expanded is... I'd highly suggest if you are a US player, because I think US is the only one that does expanded for whatever reason. If you're a US player, getting into expanded is a good idea because you will have to play it a bit. Mm-hmm. And it follows the same rules, but with different decks. And they're faster and more aggressive or oppressive.
Right.
Current expanded is don't touch it. They're going to make a ban list. Even they admitted in their last update, they're like, something's going to come for expanded, but there's no event, so we're just like kind of fine with it right now. So don't touch it right now.
Don't look at it. Just it exists over here in the side. We'll come back.
It isn't there for a bit. Come back to it later.
Exactly. All right, cool. So let's talk a little bit. We're down to kind of the end of the questions, and I kind of want to leave it as open ended. I've kind of been keeping up an eye on chat, so if chat wants to, or maybe Stronk maybe wants to point out some questions that maybe some people have for these two while we get into our last question. I think the biggest thing that a lot of people like to ask is, what are the things that you've learned? What are those weird like things that no one talks about, but just you pick it up and you're like, hey, this is kind of neat to have as like a tool for later on for games. We'll start with Brent.
I guess one thing is just know every deck in the meta. You should know everything. You have to know. Not many people talk about. I feel like they're like you need to know the meta, but like you need to know everything basically. You need to know your matchups as well. Like you need to know every deck, how they fare against each other, all that. Because when you're making a deck choice, that's quite important. And also like you need to know, oh, these are the decks being played in my area. What do I play? Because it's not going to be the same everywhere.
Yeah.
I feel like that's quite important. They don't talk about that enough.
Yeah. We actually talked about that 2 weeks ago, or 2 or 3 weeks ago. We talked about the meta, and a big key point that we talked about was that regional difference. There is a very different region of play styles between, like, say, the US, Europe, and Japan, and Oceania. And I think that's a really key thing is that when you're playing regionally or just like within your own like local play, you tend to know like the decks because it's either a local player that you've played with against before, and you're like, oh yeah, he really likes aggro decks. Like this is the deck he plays. Versus going to something like internationals or nationals, where it's like a lot of players from different regions may come, or even like Oceania players may actually fly out to the North America to attend North America internationals. You kind of have a totally different set of players that you've never met, you've never like worked with, so you don't really know what to expect. And so we talk about that a lot, is looking at metas, looking at like reports from results from other regions, and seeing what decks we're playing. But right now, currently, the common thread is ADPZ and Eternatus, I think, is the two that are big right now, right?
I think Eternus is on decline. Like there's other things like Pika, Sinscotch. Like Eternus is still up there. It's just with the hammers everywhere.
Oh yeah.
People are less inclined to play Eternus.
Nice.
Well, it's in a weird situation with the online meta where it moves faster than it ever does. So it's like
Yeah.
a really weird time to get into the game because like the online meta literally changes daily, which is not realistic at all for regionals.
Right. Out of curiosity, do you find that happening more often because more players are playing quickly, or do you think it's just because that's just online format altogether?
It's yeah, there's just like a lot of online events, and
Right.
it's the same people playing in them,
Yeah.
and it's very easy to adjust. Like
Yeah.
you can watch, oh, Eternatus is doing really well. Let's all play Lucario Melmetal Zacian because they play the Zamazenta, and the Zamazenta, you just stick it up against Eternatus, and you're like, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And go lose. That's it. And then suddenly it's like, oh, everyone's playing that. Oh, let's play Scorch, and let's play something that can knock out the Zamazenta because fire beats metal.
Right.
And then suddenly fire's doing well, and it's like, well, Pika's pretty consistent. Pika's going to do what it does more often than fire. So Pikarom comes up. And then suddenly Pikarom comes up, and it's like, Eternatus kind of punches Pika in the face. And so it's just like a very quick response,
Right.
constant.
Do you see that, Brent, as well?
One thing I gotta point out is that when you're at league and stuff, the meta develops weekly essentially. Like you only meet up with everyone once a week. With the
Right.
online tournaments, things happen like every day or something ridiculous. So it's like think of it as going like 3.5 times faster, or roughly. So the meta is just changing that much faster. So you can't expect it's like every week it might change. It's like it's already changed 7 times in the 1 week. So like it just changes faster. Like 1 week will be completely different to the next.
For sure. Yeah, I think I see that the same way with PTCGO. And PTCGO just seems like it's a very big testing bed of players. So, like, you go into the ladder, and it's just, you could be going up against some weird decks that are just kind of out there. And then sometimes you're playing against, like, the standard meta kind of thing. Or somebody's playing a testing deck that they want to do. That kind of thing, right?
Yeah. It's also weird. because PTCGO ladder, like I will play tons of decks that I know aren't competitive because it's like there's literally nothing at stake.
Right.
It's like, let's see if we can make a Nidoqueen work. It's like, of course you can.
Probably not.
Who knows? Maybe. Who knows?
You probably get some really good games though.
Right.
Like some it's like, yes, it worked this one game out of the last 5.
Let me try it again. Maybe it'll do again. So, what's another one that you might see come up, Kevin, for weird tips that you've learned?
I'd say the biggest one is just be willing to test whatever. And like, so like I mentioned earlier, my testing partner is very, very creative. He has the worst ideas I've ever heard. But the problem is, out of every 9 bad ideas, there's one that's actually very good. And often that one very good idea will end up being in a top 8 regional list the next week or something like that. And it's like, oh, I guess we should have spent our time. So like, don't automatically hear someone or think someone say something or think of something and be like, that's trash. It's not worth our time. Because sometimes like, let's try it. Let's see what happens. So don't be afraid to like spend some time and move away from like, oh, I'm going to play ADPZ only. And someone hands you a deck and you're like, oh, this deck is great. And you're like, well, let's try it. Let's see what happens. So don't like shut those doors or those opportunities, even if they sound like they're not great. Because I've definitely left some very good finishes on the board because I did not try out things that seemed bad on the surface.
Right. I think we've had a few players in our league do that, where they come up with a deck idea and it just seems very out there and very strange, and then all of a sudden next regional everyone's playing that deck somehow, and it's like, how did this deck get out? Where did it come from? That kind of thing.
The Zoro Exodia deck for Expand. So for everyone in chat who doesn't know, it was the worst deck that's ever existed. Essentially, it was a expanded deck that tried to combo red card, which shuffles your opponent's hand to your deck to draw 4 cards, with the supporter card Delinquent. Your opponent discards 3 cards from their hand. And the deck ended up being really consistent at one point where you could guarantee every single game, or like 90% of games, that your opponent would start with a 1-card hand. And, just imagine like you start your game with a 1-card hand.
Oh, no.
It sounds like a terrible idea because you're like, there's no way this is consistent. So that's one of those things where it was formed in our league. They all worked together. And it's like, it just swept the entire community at one point. It was like, oh my gosh, this thing actually is unbeatable.
Turned out to be like banned, please. And there was a ban, right? Was it red card that got banned at the time? I know Delinquent also got banned at some point.
Not a lot of stuff banned, but yes, that deck was part of the reason why.
And that tends to be how bans come up, is that a player comes up with this crazy out there deck that somehow gets consistent, and then TPCI is like, yo, this deck right here, it's a little busted. Let's remove the card. See how it goes. So, thoughts on that one, Brent?
I mean, I'm kind of a person who I'm kind of closed-minded with the ideas. Like, I should be more accepting to ideas. But I'm also a player who doesn't take many risks for tournaments, because for me, most of the time, if I get points at every event, I get the travel award, which is quite a lot of money. So I'm generally not willing to take risks. Like, sometimes I do, though, and sometimes I dismiss ideas too early. But even if there is a good idea, usually I don't play it, because it's like, I know if I play this consistent deck, I'll get like top 16 or whatever. So, I'll take it. And then someone else plays the deck and does really well. And I'm like, maybe I should have played that.
I think that's also a really key point between Oceania and I was about to say Washington. We are not the only state in the United States. Is that for you guys, because the player pool seems to be a lot smaller, you guys tend to have the same players, and it's usually pretty easy to, top out and get your awards to travel and stuff like that, versus for us, there's a lot more players, and so it's harder to like get your points that you need from a cup or going to a regional, because you have to do very well. So you tend to have to play those big decks, or come up with those really weird out there decks to compete for some reason, right?
Yeah, I would say you need to, if you have a crazy deck, when it's not known as a deck, its win rate is inflated. People don't know what they're doing. They're gonna make mistakes against you. If you're playing a deck that's standard, people are gonna be like, I know the matchup, I know what I'm doing, and you're not gonna have that extra edge. So people have to constantly find new ways, new decks to play in the US, because without that, you're just not gaining these extra percentages to get the high finishes that you need.
Right.
Because generally, it's like if you play a consistent deck, you can probably get a good finish most of the time. If you play it well, play it there. But then the problem in the US is every quarter, if you're trying to do well, you need a good finish somewhere, like a really good finish. So you've got to find some kind of good play to make.
Right.
You just gotta, I guess, try a lot of things.
I'm curious, Brent. So your regionals are smaller. Do you think that makes it easier to metagame or harder to metagame?
I mean, the thing is, it's kind of awkward because generally we only have like a handful of players at the top that we really are concerned about. So half of us end up playing the exact same deck. So it's like learn the mirror match and you should be fine.
Right. I think that's
it's pretty crazy.
Right. I think that's an interesting topic too. Is the mirror match is a very, we don't talk about mirror matches in the States as much as we probably should. We included in our plans, as far as I've heard, like some of the players will talk about, oh yeah, Eternatus mirror match or something like that. But it doesn't probably come up as often as like Oceanic comes up with, because they tend to say, oh yeah, I'm going to play against that deck again, and I'm going to have the exact same deck to go with it.
Oh, it's crazy that it's not even the exact same. It's the exact same 60.
I think you guys actually had a tournament recently that we featured where the top 2 decks or 3 decks, I think it was literally the exact same deck with like maybe a card. That was it.
I mean, I know players called Matt and Jack played the exact same deck.
Yeah.
And at Brisbane, Matt beat me in the finals in a 60 card mirror as well. We also all played the exact same deck at Latin America. And we all played the same deck at Malaysia as well, which I beat Jack in top 4 there, and then Matt only got top 64.
So I think that comes up with an interesting question is that when you're playing a mirror match like that, and both players are pretty competent at playing the same 60 cards, like, does your thought process change? Do you tend to have to think, okay, I know exactly what their deck is going to do, but I need to now like include that thought of like, okay, how does this player play the 60 cards, right?
I mean, the problem was when we're playing Mewtwo Mirror, so everything's flexible. It's like we don't know what's going to happen because it's like, oh, what if they prize this attacker? What if they're forced to use it? You never know. Like, I'm just like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen, but I hope it goes well.
Right.
Like,
so there's a lot of luck.
Like, there are things that like I want to do like the tag purge or something, but then there are other parts where it's just like, please don't draw anything. I can't win if you do.
I think that's the best wish is like, oh, just draw pass, please. Just draw pass.
Yeah,
I'm good.
and then they opened Jirachi, because back then we didn't have any search for our Jirachis. And
Right.
so like opening Jirachi was quite big, and we're just like, please do not open this card. It'll ruin my day.
Exactly. All right. So I didn't get any questions from the chat. So let's we'll close out with a really interesting question that I did not actually include in the list of questions for you guys. So I'm gonna throw you a little curveball. Outside of the meta, what is one of the most interesting decks that you've come across and played? Even as like it was a one-time thing that you played, and it, even if it didn't work out, it was a really intriguing idea that it existed, and it was like, this could work, this could have played, but even if it didn't or did not, it doesn't matter. Just what was the most interesting deck you've played? I'll let you guys think about it for a second, and whoever's first can start speaking.
Wait, is it for this format or for like any format?
Any format. 2013 could have been your most interesting deck. Who knows? I know you probably hit a lot of decks over 7 years.
Yeah, that's pretty tough for me.
Right.
I think I have one deck in mind that when I was young, I thought this deck was like really cool. Because like, I would say back in 2013, there weren't, like, we didn't have many abilities for draw or anything.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't really have any lock decks at the time. We didn't have anything of that kind. So it was quite interesting. And there was this deck from Japan. I saw it was like in some Japanese result. It had like so I forgot. So use Mute EX, which I'm not sure if anyone knows it. It's like you can copy the attacks of anything in play, and then I forgot which card it was, but it was I think it was like a Watchog. It's like you look at either player's top card of the deck and you rearrange it, like the top five. So it's like the idea of the deck was you try to get rid, like you try to make your opponent dead draw, and then you just lock them out of the game. And that was like the first time I ever saw any lock deck, and I'm like, wow, this is so cool as an idea. And but also before I even saw it, I saw like I forgot where they like reported the results, but I just see like it's just like 6 random Pokemon. I'm like, what is this? So it's like it was kind of cool to see that idea, and that was like the first time I ever saw something like really that creative.
Gotcha. Nice. Kevin, you look like you have a deck.
I do. I have like so one of the problems is anytime I've had a creative deck, it's like actually been a good idea that someone else just did better. So like for example, going back to Portland Regionals this year, anyone who was local knew I was obsessed with Eggrow Vileplume. I was like, this deck is broken, this deck is broken, I'm gonna win Portland with it. And the week before, JW Creewall won a regional with it. I was like, this deck sucks. I can't use it. Everyone's gonna counter it.
Right.
So this actually leads into the actual one. This was handed to me by I don't know if Caston's watching. Probably not. It was handed to me by him.
Caston comes up with weird decks.
Yes, this one was really good, kind of. It was a lock deck in expanded, and it was just a gigantic combo, but essentially you used a Sableye that had an attack that said your opponent can't use supporters. It used Black Market Prism Star, and it used a Ninetales that said your opponent cannot play stadiums.
Oh no.
And so what you did is you kept the Sableye with Black Market Prism, so if they knocked it out, they didn't get a prize.
Right.
They couldn't replace the stadium because its Field Blower didn't work on it, and Ninetales prevented anything.
Oh.
The only thing it lost to in like the original testing was Garbodor with Garbotoxin.
Gotcha. The
That's
ability.
a fine auto one to take.
Right.
And then we dug deeper into it, and a bunch of decks were playing Octillery with a Remoraid that had an attack called Ion Pool that said discard any stadium in play.
Oh no.
So you're like, oh, this stupid Remoraid.
And it's
And
got
so-
Like, you create the perfect deck, and the support Pokemon basic
right.
ruins your
Yep.
entire plan.
It was bad because it was like, okay, we can take the loss to one of the main decks, but now we're taking a loss to this stupid thing.
This random basic Pokemon that just appears in a deck.
They both played it, and they did not do well, unfortunately.
Nice.
But it was broken in theory.
In theory. In practice, though, not so well.
I mean, it's only Remoraid that's causing the problem. They should just ban Remoraid.
Right? Just get rid of Remoraid. We don't need it. So Strong had a question, but I had one deck, and Kevin might have heard this deck one time that I ran very briefly. It was probably the most interesting deck, and it came from Jonathan, who gave it to me. Jonathan was pulling a lot of wishy-washy GXs, which were the one with the big catch, the massive catch, and it was like, look at the top 12 cards of your deck and grab the basics from it and put them on your bench. And there was an attack that did like 20 damage times the number of wishy-washy on your bench. And so he's like, make a wishy-washy deck. So I legitimately grabbed all the wishy-washy. It was literally just wishy-washy GX, 4 of those, and the regular basic wishy-washy. So your bench was just wishy-washy. And you would just attack that way. And then you had Island Challenge Amulet to make sure that the wishy-washy GXs only gave 1 prize rather than 2. Because the plus side is that Wishy-Washy had the ability that added like 20 HP and 20 damage to each Pokemon named Wishy-Washy. So this 120, I think it was, Wishy-Washy GX had like 250 HP, and then you subtract 100 because of the Island Challenge Amulet, and that was it. And it was probably the most inconsistent thing I ran, but it was hilarious to like this Wishy-Washy GX doing like 200 damage to a Pokemon because of the 5 support Wishy-Washy on the bench, just hammering it in. It was great. So Probably an interesting deck for me. Probably not for you guys, but I can qualify and say that I've played a wishy-washy deck. um, so final question from Strong. It's a bit of a long one, but it says, I know at least for myself and some other people, there's a huge culture shift, it seems, when going from seniors to masters in age divisions for tournaments. What are some things that you think are important to learn from seniors, or for seniors, who are going to move up to so that they can become a masters material player? Essentially, what are the things that you think that a shift happens for senior players going into masters? We'll start with Brent on that one.
I mean, I am a senior.
You
that
are a
did go to
senior
master,
too. Yeah, exactly.
so I'm the prime example for this. I'm not entirely sure because I remember in seniors, like when I first started, it's like your metagame for specific players. Like I know that people still do that in seniors. Like sometimes there aren't that many people in the area or something. It's like there's tournaments like there are those certain few players that are like at the top. It's like I need to prepare to beat these players, and you generally know like you might have a read on what they're gonna play. So these days, usually they switch up so often because they cannot afford people to know what deck they're playing.
Right.
But generally, do not get fixated on a single person. Try to get if you're making your meta read, you have to get on the entire meta now.
Right.
It's like you have to think about everyone. It's not just about like two people. It's like I'm not trying to beat just two people. There's 60 players, and you don't even need to beat all of them in the Swiss. Keep in mind, you need to go like 4-1-1 or something, or like 5-1-1. So I guess you just got to think what is going to be my best odds against everyone, not against just one player. And generally, also you need to just make sure, of course, you're playing good decks. Sometimes you can experiment with ideas, which it's fine because a lot of ideas are really good. But a lot of the time as well, if you just play good decks, like you will get results, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
And also, don't forget you have all your fundamentals from seniors. Like you know how to play the game. It's like it's not that hard, I think. Like you might not have the most success at the beginning, but it shouldn't be that bad. Like if you just keep trying.
Yeah. I think our seniors have a weird for our group of seniors. As far as what I've seen, our seniors are like they like to play a lot of meme decks and a lot of like this feels like it works, but then they move to masters and it's like I can't meme and I can't have fun with my decks. Now I have to actually play meta. What do you see, Kevin, with that senior to master shift?
I mean, in addition to everything Brent said is 100% correct. Like the difference between metagaming for 20-person regional and 80, 100-person regional, or sorry, that'd be another like seniors in the US. 600
Yeah.
regional is
I was talking
gigantic.
about like tops more so, but yeah, regionals.
Well, I know talking to one of the Poke parents here, it's juniors instead of seniors. But like he's like, I know every junior who's gonna be there because there's like 20 of them. So like he metagames for it. I don't know if seniors works that way, but anyway.
It can at times. It depends on the size usually. Like
Okay.
when you start getting to like 40 players and stuff, that's when it's like you kind of think, okay, maybe it's everyone now that I got to think about.
Right.
But, if it's like 10 players or something, it's like there's only one or two players that I actually care about beating.
I think that's why our seniors that tend to do a little bit more meme decks is that they
Yeah, and yeah, as I said, unless you're really confident in a lot of your ideas, if you're just starting out, I would just play a consistent tier, like top tier deck, because like that you can experiment, but generally, if you want results on average, you're just gonna be playing whatever you think the top deck is. You just shouldn't be playing these memes. A lot of them will just continue playing memes and masters, and it's not gonna work most of the time.
right.
When you get really good, though, some of those ideas you make are gonna start working in masters. But as a senior going into masters, I would probably suggest that you just start by playing the top decks.
Yeah,
For
the
sure.
skill gap between seniors and masters is vastly overrated by anyone who tells you it exists.
Right.
Like the top seniors come into masters every year and dominate. Like we watched Isaiah Bradner in masters last year go from, it was his first year and he was like top 8ing regionals consistently. Like it's not like he's suddenly like, oh, I'm in masters, I'm terrible. Like if you're a top senior player, you're going to be a very good masters player.
Mhm.
If you're an average senior player, you're still going to be an average player in masters, which is
Right.
pretty good. Like
Right.
it's not like you're suddenly worse than everyone. A lot of masters are very bad at the game we're gonna be honest.
Real quick, there was one other question that came through that I missed, but just real quick answer from you guys. How do you not get exhausted practicing and playing hours of Pokemon?
It's a game, and the game is fun. So that's the big one.
I mean, for me, generally, it's like I enjoy it. If I can enjoy it, I can play it for a long time. I know some people do get exhausted of the game. I guess just taking breaks helps. Like, even if it's a short break, you know, you can go outside, maybe have a drink, have some food, something. You know, if you can't keep at it, like you can probably do like at least a couple hours, take a break, then do a couple more if you really need to play a lot that day.
Yeah. Just
So
trying to
I
avoid
don't know,
that
just
burnout.
take breaks if you need to take breaks. You definitely do not need to play for like 12 hours straight. I mean, I do that, but you don't need to.
You don't have to be like Brent, but you should be like Brent, you know. Awesome. Well, I want to thank you guys for being on the podcast and talking about your experiences. It was really fun having you guys and just hearing from you guys and learning more about what players of your caliber kind of see and experience and go through, for sure. Is there any last bit of things that you want to say to anybody real quick before we leave?
I'm gonna shout myself out. If you are interested in the game, I stream mostly PTCGO on Twitch, twitch.tv/mellow_Magikarp. I tend to go slightly higher. Like I assume everyone has a certain baseline of knowledge, but I'm also happy to answer questions, which is basically like, why did you play the cards in that order? Uh, I am a teacher for trade, so I feel like I'm pretty good at explaining stuff. So if you are interested, want to get better at the game, there are other Twitch streamers too, but I'm not going to talk about them. I'm talking about myself. Mellow_Magikarp on Twitch.
I went ahead and dropped your link in the Twitch chat for you. What about you, Brent? Any last words?
I mean, I haven't really been too into it recently, so I wouldn't say like I'm not streaming or anything. So I'm not entirely sure.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I don't know.
Have fun.
Yeah, I guess, and also I guess if you have any juniors or seniors that might be interested, try to get them into the game. Just try to get them to go to league.
Oh yeah.
Because
For sure.
it's also a lot easier for them. It's a lot more comfortable as an environment.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's very hard. First year masters is like the hardest time to get into the game. I think.
Definitely.
Like probably like you get there, you're going in the big league, but you're still quite young. Like generally, if you're under like 18, you're generally like restricted in what you can do, and then you're in masters already. Like, wait, this isn't fair.
Exactly. I think, yeah, going in with friends is a good idea. My first league experience, I went by myself and immediately made a friend that I still am friends with today, and we play regularly. So, yeah, having friends and having friends bring you to league is great. It's probably the best experience for sure. So, all right. That is all we have time for. Again, I can't thank you guys enough for coming on and talking and just letting people know what it's like to be competitive and that we're all here for fun and not trying to cut each other's throats off playing Pokemon. So, definitely, guys, check out.
Regional finals, you're trying to kill them.
Right. For sure.
I want that win real bad.
Right. So yeah, make sure to give them a follow. I think Brent, you have a Twitter, twitter.com/
wet_goose.
Yeah. Give them a follow, give them a shout out, and I guess we will see you guys later. Thanks again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.